Before this video begins, I want to give credit to Thunderbolt 1000T Siren Productions for being the inspiration behind this documentary. If you like my video and you want to check out more videos like this, I recommend that you check out his channel. He has been covering a bunch of train wrecks and been doing these style documentaries for years now. Also, a disclaimer. This video's subject matter may be a bit grim and dark for some. So, if you find yourself being disturbed, I suggest you click away from this video. And remember, viewer's discretion is advised. 2013 was one of the most infamous years for Metro North, with a total of 3 accidents, all within this short span of time in between each other. It's just safe to say that it wasn't exactly a great year for the railroad organization as a whole, and the most notable and infamous out of those 3 accidents occurred on December 1st of 2013. This is the story of the Spuyten Duyvil accident. December the 1st, 2013. At 5:54 a.m., Metro North train number 8808, the Hudson Line Semi-Express to Grand Central, departs Poughkeepsie Station in upstate New York. The train consists of Bombardier Shoreliner 4, cab car number 6222 leading, 6 Shoreliner coaches trailing, all mixed with the red Condot scheme and the blue MTA scheme, and GE P32AC DM Genesis locomotive number 225 trailing. This locomotive has the option for diesel power as well as third rail power when heading into Grand Central. The rear 2 cars of this train that were closest to the engine were closed off, used for deadheading employees to Grand Central. The train is operating in push mode, as in the engine on the rear providing power to the train, and the cab car leads at the front. At the controls of the train is engineer William D. Rockefeller, a 15-year Metro North veteran who began his career as a clerk in the station master's office in Grand Central, and then spent the next 10 years as an engineer. His operating style was called very smooth by many railroad colleagues, including the conductors on the train. Before this incident, he never once had been fined or suspended for breaking railroad regulations. However, this was his first morning shift, as he had transferred over from the afternoon and early evening shift, something he later told investigators he did reluctantly, as it required him to leave his home 27 miles away from Poughkeepsie just after 3 a.m. He did just that this morning, however, doing his routine and safety checks before setting off from Poughkeepsie. There were 2 other employees on the train with Rockefeller, Michael Herman, another veteran who was acting as the head conductor for the train, and Maria Herbert, another conductor who was Herman's assistant and worked regularly with him. The train proceeded in the pre-dawn darkness along the line, which lightened as the sun began to rise, along the 2-track main line, which is shared along with Amtrak's Empire Corridor service trains. The train would make all local stops before arriving at Croton Harmon at roughly around 6:50 a.m. At Croton Harmon, the Hudson Line now becomes a 4-track main line that is electrified all the way to Grand Central. It was at this time the train picked up another Metro North assistant conductor, Chris Kelly. However, the train was held up briefly. After this, the train continued down the line to Ossining, where it would become an express. The last stop the train would make before crossing New York City's limits was Tarrytown, and from Tarrytown onward, the train would make no more stops until Harlem 125th Street station in Manhattan. Between Ossining and Tarrytown, Herman and Herbert moved to the center of the train and met each other before moving to the opposite ends to check the tickets from anyone boarding at Tarrytown. Their movement to opposite ends of the train was a Metro North regulation, so that Herbert could call the signals going into Grand Central in the cab with Rockefeller. At the back, Herman instructed Kelly to fill out his paperwork for his next trip, as the train's light passenger load didn't require more than 2 conductors. There were also 5 other employees in the rear 2 cars. From here on, the train continued down the 4-track main line, running right next to the Hudson River and even being on the water's edge at times. As it entered the city of Yonkers and it passed the 4 stations, those being Glenwood, Greystone, Yonkers, and Ludlow, the train was capped at a 50-mile-per-hour speed limit, later augmented by a 60-mile-per-hour speed limit temporarily set up at Ludlow Station due to construction. After passing Ludlow, the train entered the borough of the Bronx and would pass Riverdale Station. South of Riverdale is the junction of Spuyten Duyvil, Here, Amtrak trains leave the Hudson Line and cross a swing bridge over the Harlem River Ship Canal before traveling the West Side Line to Penn Station in Midtown Manhattan. Meanwhile, Metro-North trains take a sharp left turn before passing the Spuyten Duyvil station under the Henry Hudson Bridge and paralleling the Harlem River through the Bronx. The curve at Spuyten Duyvil is where the train should have slowed down. At 7:19, however, disaster happens. The train jumps the tracks at about 100 yards north of the station, coming dangerously close to going into the Harlem River. In one of the passenger cars, passenger Linda Smith said it was like a movie going on around me. She and her sister Donna were tossed around their car as the cushions of the seats were hurled around them, and the train went sideways. Another passenger, Joel Zartiski, a dentist on his way to a convention, said the train accident was like severe turbulence on an airplane. At the rear of the train, Michael Herman recalled hearing a rattling sound before his car jolted him forward and threw him to the opposite end before throwing him up to the ceiling and back down again, then back up and then back down. Up at the front, Maria Herbert recalled trying to get up from her seat to continue her duty, but then tumbling on the floor and then slamming against the ceiling several times. After what seemed like a lifetime, the train came to rest and Herman began to take charge of the situation, calling into the Metro-North dispatcher about the derailment. Him and Kelly would coordinate the passengers and the emergency responders to try to get the situation under control. At the front of the train, the mostly uninjured engineer, Rockefeller, tended to Herbert as he had seen Kelly and Herman take charge of the situation. The train's entire consist came off the rails, but the rear three cars and the engine stayed near the tracks, while the four front cars all sat on the grassy patch next to the river. In all, 61 passengers were injured in the wreck, one of them being Linda Smith, who was pinned under several seat cushions. Tragically, 4 people died in the accident. All but one was thrown from the first front cars following the wreck. Amongst those 4 was Linda Smith's sister, Donna. The New York City Fire Department, the FDNY, sent over 125 firefighters to assist with the rescue. EMS workers, however, would be delayed in getting to the scene, as the power to the third rails had to be cut off, or crews risked getting electrocuted. Crews took the survivors to the nearby John F. Kennedy High School near Marble Hill and set up a family resource center. Once all the survivors were accounted for, it was closed later that afternoon. Almost immediately, Metro-North suspended all service on the Hudson Line south of Croton-Harmon, as a consequence leaving 20,000 passengers stranded. However, Amtrak service, although it was suspended initially, was reopened on their line at 3 p.m. the same day. Metro-North would later restore limited service as far south as Yonkers Station. Shuttle buses were provided to Yonkers into the Van Cortlandt Park 242nd Street station by the MTA, along with service being provided farther north at Tarrytown between it and the White Plains Station on the Metro-North Harlem line. Westchester County also offered free parking at the Valhalla Station for the lot that it operated there. Rockland County, also across the river from the Hudson River from Tarrytown, began operating extra express bus service over the Tappan Zee Bridge. As I mentioned before, Amtrak also suspended service on the Empire Corridor for the duration of the morning, leaving many college students and holiday travelers stranded until service was restored later that afternoon, albeit with delays and restrictions around the accident site. MTA crews worked around the clock, and on the following day after the accident, December 2nd, crews righted and brought the derailed cars and the engine back onto the tracks. The cars were evenly brought between Croton-Harmon and Highbridge yards, while crews siphoned 225's tanks of the fuel and cleaned up any remaining diesel fuel that was spilled at the site. The entire consist was later impounded by the NTSB for further investigation. Service was partially restored on December 4th, with many trains being combined in order to serve the line, and many customers were noted how fast the railroad got its service back and underway. They even expressed their sympathy for the engineer. After the accident, though, the big question was, what the hell happened? Was Rockefeller on drugs? Was it sabotage? Was something wrong with the track? Well, The NTSB began their investigation, and a scathing letter was written by the head, Joseph Sabo, to the head of the MTA, Tom Pendergast. The letter was highly critical of the agency. Sabo noted that the agency had 5 accidents in 1 year. The earlier Fairfield derailment on the New Haven line in May of 2013, the July 2013 CSX freight derailment, which occurred not far south of where this accident happened, and another smaller accident on the New Haven line in which a worker was killed. He requested immediate action to the safety of the system, and Pendergast later responded by saying that the agency had begun holding safety discussions for over 4,000 employees. Since this accident occurred in the early 2010s, it was another accident that spurred further the discussion of the implementation of positive train control, or PTC. Following the 2008 Chatsworth, California train collision, the Federal Railroad Administration, the FRA, required all American commuter railroads to implement positive train control by 2015. However, many of those railroads resisted, amongst them being the MTA's 2 railroads, Metro-North and the Long Island Railroad, who wanted that deadline extended until at least 2018. The key reason was mainly because the railroads, and specifically the MTA, wasn't because of the money, because they had already allocated $600 million to the budget for the installation, but mainly because they had doubts about the system. They called it untested and unproven for commuter railroads of our size. Then New York State Governor Andrew Cuomo also said, "Positive train control is controversial. Some people say it's not cracked up what it is to be." In the case of William D. Rockefeller, he initially claimed that he attempted to apply the brakes a few seconds before the accident. He also began to state in the last few seconds of the accident later on, admitting to interviewers he had blanked out, feeling as if he was just in a daze and unable to move. Investigators also attributed this to being very similar to white line fever, which is a common fever that happens when a driver behind the wheel of a car feels as if they're in a daze and they can't move. After initially investigating to see if he was on drugs or alcohol, or if his cell phone was in use, the investigation found that he had been diagnosed with severe obstructive sleep apnea, a complication resulting from his obesity. They also found that he had traces of chlorpheniramine, an antihistamine commonly found in over-the-counter cold medications. Due to this sedative effects of this substance, it's advised against driving motor vehicles or heavy machinery after taking this medication. Rockefeller denied using the medication before the accident, and his lawyers stated it would not justify a criminal charge, which was being discussed at the time. Ultimately, he was not charged for any negligence in the entire time of his lawsuits or the investigation, even though the threat of charges of negligent homicide were being talked about. 11 months after the incident, the NTSB released their final report. They concluded again that PTC would have prevented the entire accident. It would have stopped the train at least short of the curb before it even came off the rails. The NTSB also faulted Metro-North for not having any screenings for employees with sleep disorders that investigators found as safety sensitive. They also faulted the FRA for not requiring railroads to do this action. Finally, it stated that the glazings of the train, the area around the windows, and the windows themselves were at fault, as they were a key factor in the loss of life. Besides the investigation, the MTA and Metro-North were slammed with lawsuits. The estimates of the claims that the MTA had to pay off totaled at around $60 million. Coupled together with the $9 million in cleaning up the accident, the accident stands as the costliest wreck in Metro-North's history. Following the accident, Bombardier and Siemens were contracted to install PTC systems on Metro-North. The consist of cars involved in the derailment were mostly repaired and put back into service, including P32-225. However, the Shoreliner 4 cab car, 6222, was deemed a loss and retired after the incident. The accident also resulted in Metro-North putting up numerous speed restrictions across the systems, including the curve at Spuyten, Duyvil. In the case of Rockefeller, he eventually was retired and was slated to receive his pension. However, he didn't, and he appealed it. Later on in 2015, and it was awarded $3,200. He also attempted to sue the railroad for $10 million, claiming that they didn't have a proper alert system in the cab, as well as claiming they had failed to do so and knew about this kind of thing after another engineer was suspended in 2005, speeding on the same curve and causing passenger belongings to fly off the luggage racks. The MTA initially tried to countersue, but ultimately both suits were dropped. Today, service on the Hudson Line still operates as usual, albeit much slower around the Spuyten Duyvil area, as many systems and precautions are taken today by Metro North to make sure something like this never happens again. And here's to hoping that it doesn't.